Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the monthly formation webinar. The session today is all around, I guess, the nuances of if you're thinking about delivering a Teams voice service, all of the things that go on behind the scenes to help a smooth transition, whether you're migrating from a traditional PBX, maybe you're thinking about moving from ISDN, SIP, and equally into Teams. I've got two of my very good colleagues on, Mike Gilroy-Scott, who regularly joins me on the session, but our special guest today, our operations director and all-round legend, Misha Wells.
What intro, Mike.
Yes, well, I've got to big you up. Misha's had 10 years experience of delivering voice projects. She obviously started when she was 10 years old. Wouldn't want to give her away her age. But, you know, the rock within formation and really the forefront of driving our Teams projects for a lot of our customers that we have done today. So thank you very much for joining, Misha.
No worries, thanks for having me.
A little bit of housekeeping. So any questions, you guys that have joined, this is all about you today. So please ask any questions in the chat window. We'll look to address them during and after the session. We'll keep the bridge open. Equally, if you do want to have any offline conversations, maybe there's something poignant on the session that you'd like to pick up offline, feel free to drop us a note after, email, give us a call. We're happy to have those conversations, even if it's some advice. If nothing else, we'd like to you know, try and help on all things Teams that you may be thinking about. But other than that, we'll get kicked off. So as I said, you know, we've seen a whole bunch of noise in the market, good positive noise. People are looking to go to Microsoft Teams. There's a whole bunch of, I guess, MSPs from an IT perspective that might be pitching Teams, but don't necessarily come from a voice background. And what we've found from the projects that we've delivered so far on Microsoft Teams is, and equally generally delivering voice services over the years, you know, in our 15-year sort of history as a team, there's a bunch of elements or key parts of the project that need to come into play. So whilst on the surface they might seem quite boring, laborious things to think about, I'm going to open up the floor to Misha to kick off, just talking through the key phases, things to watch out for, and hopefully give you some advice if you are planning this. So Mish, you are, for your sins, a porting expert. I know you don't tell people when you're out in the pub.
Thought you were going to say geek then. But
yeah, no, I didn't want to go that far. But look, you've been in and around number porting for many years. Service is obviously regulated. What's your sort of key bit of advice in terms of planning for porting? You've seen good and bad ports over the years. What if someone was delivering Teams, what would be the key bit of advice you would sort of give to start thinking about planning, specifically when you're thinking about number porting in a Teams project?
Sure, yeah, so porting is, as you say, often seen as a bit of a dark art. It can seem quite onerous, and I think where you are having to sort of liaise with a provider that you're ultimately leaving, again, that can be a bit of a challenge. Planning early is the key thing. As you say, it's a regulated element of the project, so there is a certain amount that we sort of can't change in regards to lead times and so on, but there is a huge amount that we can do. So yeah, I think the key thing is to start planning early. It's to sort of understand exactly what your DDI estate looks like, what different numbers do, because there's a lot of people out there who have DDIs sort of sat on their estate that they don't really know what it does. So yeah, understand what you've got, where it's sitting. For example, the provider that you're leaving may just be a reseller. They might not actually own the range. So it's to get as much background information as you need. And we will always guide that. There's a kind of a template that you would have to complete, which is a letter of authority, essentially, which kind of gives us permission to take those DDIs over. So again, your leasing provider has an obligation to provide that information. It doesn't necessarily mean it's always easy. Yeah. We had one recently, a company in the education sector who had sort of 9 sites, so a huge sort of DDI estate, and was really, really struggling with their provider and getting the information out of them. So in those instances, we can also step in and help. We can either liaise directly with the leasing provider rather than having sort of, you know, the customer in the middle, being kind of middleman, if you like. And also we're able to use our contacts and our systems in the back end just to take that pain away, essentially. And at the end, he was like, I can't believe you've managed to get this info. I've been battling on this for months. And so we can also do that if it is becoming a struggle. But essentially planning early and just making sure that we sort of collate all of the information there to avoid any rejections or any delays with the project process, because that lead time ultimately often will define the date that we're targeting. As I say, that's a bit that's somewhat out of our control from that regard.
Yeah, sure. Because I think that's a key thing we've seen customers sort of struggle with in the past is there's a fear of it, as you mentioned. It seems like this complex process, and obviously if you've been there, done it, like yourself and your team, you live and breathe this sort of stuff. But as you said, planning, understanding your ranges, and the most annoying thing to try and avoid is that rejection from the regulators. So just getting your house in order, and something that we can help streamline is
Exactly
the essence then.
Yeah, and the benefit of that is there is a structure to it. So there is there's a clear kind of from the outset what information that we need. If you've got that, great. But the point is, if you don't have that and you're struggling to get it, we can also step in and assist with that.
Yeah, sure. So I think that's key. And if you haven't come from the voice background, porting can seem crazy, but you can control it and you can manage it and make sure the ports are as seamless as possible, and ultimately reduce business downtime. That's the key part of it, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. There doesn't have to be any impact on users for this nowadays. Yeah, it can all be done out of hours without anyone knowing it's going on.
Good. So so the dry subject of porting, equally important, but again, looking at a provider that can help really will take the stress out of the project and make sure it stays on plan. The next part, again, is kind of within Teams is a lot easier to do now. But when we talk about data capture, looking at users, groups, and all that sort of stuff, that's important. But what's your biggest message, Mies, in terms of people that might be thinking about Teams? Would you argue to say it has to be big bang, or would you say keep simple? What's your advice on that?
I'd say generally what we found is that people just want to kind of essentially stick with what they have, but move that over to the new technology. So we don't need to go through a huge kind of innovation with how your users work and everything else, because there's a huge amount of change been happening recently anyway. And I think a lot of people will hold off migrating to Teams because it feels like it's going to be a really big change for the users, and also the way in which they manage the system. And it doesn't need to be. We can essentially take what you have on your kind of old style phone system, migrate that over to Teams, and then once that's done, once you're on the new technology, we can then look at how do we improve the way that you guys work, what features can be introduced, and so on. So it can be done in a phased approach, so it's not going to be a huge burden on the kind of teams that manage that internally. So
it's like don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to go too crazy with like new functions. Teams does 1,000,001 things, but it's about get the hygiene layer, get people comfortable with it, and then you can fine tune. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly that. And I think the vast majority of people over the course of the last sort of 18 months have got familiar with Teams. They've been using it internally. So just adding in the direct routing is not a huge change. And again, it's kind of getting back to ways in which they're used to working from, as say, a user or hunt groups, IVRs, all those sorts of things we can just replicate over onto Teams. So if you don't have the headspace to think about a potentially better way or more efficient way of working, we can just move it across, which is generally the way people like to do it. And then once it's embedded in, users are kind of using it, then we can look at sort of fun and clever things to add in.
Yeah, sure. Mike, question to you on sort of data capture and this myth that Microsoft is this very different beast to say a traditional telephone system. In a real nutshell, it's fair to say user setup, you can achieve hunt groups, you can achieve all of the IVR flows. It's got a lot of ticks in the box now. Is that a fair comment, Mike?
Yeah, that's right. I think we covered it in the last webinar. We were talking about telephony features that you may not know kind of are available in Microsoft Teams. You mentioned a few there, your hunt groups or call queues, IVRs or auto attendants. Some of the sort of more sort of traditional telephony features such as busy on busy is a thing, forwarding to your calls to voicemail, simultaneous ring or twinning of calls, all of those features exist. There's not hundreds of thousands of them, but essentially all of the ones you're probably used to using on your PBX or whatever phone system you had before, you pretty much covered in Teams, and they all work.
So simplicity and I guess reassurance for the people that we can replicate a lot of stuff. If people think, oh, I really like this feature, generally 9 times out of 10 you can achieve on Teams. I think that's the key part, which brings actually to the next sort of topic to ask. And Mish, we bang on about this all the time and why it's so important for user training and adoption. So talk to us about the way that we would tend to train staff on Teams, and actually where we've had a great buy-in from the wider sort of employee ecosystem taken on Teams because it's in the same application. A couple of points on that. So firstly, how we deliver the training.
Yeah, so I think what we do, we don't, there are lots of sort of Microsoft resources out there, but we will do a fully interactive training session with a human being on the customer's actual system. So it's bespoke to you. It really, really helps. I mean, I think from a historically, users adopting new technology has been a bit of a challenge with Teams because, as I said earlier, people have been using it for the last 18 months. It's not scary. It's not something that's going to be a challenge often to get people to start to use and accept. So that's already a bit a win. The training really is to help to understand how to sort of best utilize the feature sets on there. Because often people say, well, I just make a phone call, and there's just a lot more that you can do to really enhance the experience. So that's where I think we can add the benefit. As I say, it's bespoke to you. We try to do it in small user groups and encourage people to have their cameras on and to ask questions and to kind of interact with the trainer, as opposed to they now have cameras off and sort of people just kind of listening in. It is supposed to be an interactive session. They're all recorded, so we can kind of revisit them if you've got new starters or people who are on annual leave. The resource is there, but yeah, it's not a generic resource that you can get on the internet for Microsoft. It is specific to you, and we found them really, really, really helpful. Really, really positive feedback. And we can also offer, if you've got, for example, receptionists or people like PAs who do specific tasks around delegation, we can also kind of tailor it to specific users, not just within the generalist type stuff.
And the key to any project is getting people on board, and it's kind of like when you roll out Teams, we've seen that you get the dial pad, it appears, and people often are like, oh, that I've now got calls coming into my Teams, rather than, hey, here's a new application, here's how you enter short code, and it's like, oh my god, I've got a new application. So removing app fatigue, if that's ever a thing. Okay, exactly. So that's good. Okay. And I guess if people are out there that so we've talked about training adoption, talked about data capture, we talked about porting. You drink, without using, well, I'm going to use the cliche, drink your own champagne, but managing the process as well in terms of actually project managing. Talk to us about how Teams actually helps you engage with your customers and really give them that feel of, I can contact Formation project team when I need to. How have you done that?
Yeah, we've started to manage. It was actually sort of at the beginning of lockdown, really, we started to do that. We're managing all our projects via Teams, which we found really, really successful. Again, people are familiar with the application. It means that you can have you're on your Teams all day, every day, as we all are. So you're not having to go into a different application or, remember a link to try and get in contact with us or waiting for an email response. You've got, the IM feature there, so it's much, much quicker. It's much more efficient. You've got all of the documentation management on there as well, so it's fully kind of open and available for everyone to see, everyone to contribute to, so it's incredibly collaborative. And we found it a lot more efficient than sort of emailing documents backwards and forwards and waiting for that. We absolutely do those weekly calls, check-ins and everything else to make sure that the momentum is kept up and those relationships remain strong. But it's also really helpful if you just want to ask a quick question, you can't quite remember what was said. It's much more sort of instant, and as I said, we found the efficiency has just been there compared to the sort of antiquated email backwards and forwards.
And it's that conversation history that's there in Teams, because if you're using Teams to do this sort of collaborative work, if you think, oh, we discussed that a few weeks back, I can't quite remember what was said, you can just literally scroll back and go, there's a recap. We don't have to cover the same ground on a call, etc.
Yeah, and everything's version control. Before we'd have, I remember at the end of a project, we might have, 10 versions of a project plan. And obviously everything now is updated live. You can obviously, if you needed to, view old versions, but it's all updated on a live tracker, for example. So yeah, it's, again, a lot easier to find the information that you need to look for.
Good. So yeah, Teams do its thing. And again, it's about that accountable, always available. Little questions that pop up, you can use Teams to its strength there. The final piece, Mish, which I know you're a massive stickler for, and you relentlessly trying to find the people, but talk to us about we can talk about all of the process, but the people make a difference, specifically, formation, but talk to us about the team that you've built and the way that we deliver projects with people that are dedicated to the customer, where you're not dipping into lots of things. You do get the dedication of a PM and an engineer, and why is that so critical when we're thinking about these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing we do once, a projects or a new implementation has been sold, is we put together that kind of crack team of who's going to be on it, and that doesn't change from the start of the project through to completion. So when we do a kickoff call, all of those introductions will be done. So the project manager, as you say, a lead project engineer, often a supporting engineer, and a project coordinator. So there's a full team, like I said, there from the beginning. So we will start to understand the client, the specific sort of to their environment, to the way in which they work, because every customer is different. We have a process that we follow, but we're very passionate about being able to be flexible and be nimble and adjust that process in accordance with the customer's needs. So, for example, we just ran one, I think I mentioned them earlier, it was in education. I'm in the education sector, and because of sort of summer holidays and staffing levels, we were not able to follow our normal process. So we sort of, broke that apart and just said, right, how do we manage to deliver an efficient and controllable project, but within sort of the timeframes, for example, and so on, that you need around your staffing levels, and that worked really well. And I think it's very important to do that. And as I say, the team, we've been together for a long time now. We've all been doing it for a long time. We know the roles and responsibilities are kind of very much ingrained, and everyone just has an attitude of wanting to do the best thing and the right thing for the customer. That experience is incredibly important from a relationship side. If you're joining up with Formation, you're going to hopefully be with us for a long time to come, and that's the start of the journey, and setting those foundations in place is incredibly important.
Yeah, sure.
Can I pick up on that point she made, with that example she gave? I think that's a really important point. A lot of these Teams migrations, it's not big bang. You can phase these things. That particular example we would describe as probably a soft launch, and then a real launch at a later date when everyone's back from holiday, and then it's being used in anger. So these things can be switched on without disrupting existing services. You can get used to it. You can make sure everything's working as you expect. I mean, we had pressure on the project to sort of get things in and working before exam results. So there was a very short time scale to get this whole project off the ground and running. So it was quite a challenging one, but I think we all learned a lot from it, and it was delivered on time, in budget, and customer was very happy.
Yeah, I think back to the point I made at the beginning around there's lots of people trying to do Teams voice that maybe come from an IT background. So advice for anyone on the call that's thinking about looking at contracts, looking at T's and C's, is really pay attention to who's going to manage it, the time that they're putting into actually delivering, because there's nothing worse than, as you may or may not know, sign up to a new solution and then you get put into a generic support queue. They don't know the customer, don't know your nuances, and you just get frustrated. We're very clear on deliver the project, and we'll talk about at the end of the call about the support transition, because that's such a key part of making sure that it's doing what it says in the tin, and us doing our job ultimately to deliver value on this. Thank you, guys. So, Mike, a couple of questions. We talked about the softer side in terms of project managing, things to look out for. We talked about porting, talked about data capture, process people, learning and adoption. Mike, the technical parts of Teams, again, this is in the theme of some service providers sort of selling the Teams service up to their edge. So they'll give you all the trunks, give you all the SBC, and then they say, hey, Mr. Customer, you go and configure Teams. And if you're not a voice specialist or you don't know how to build IVRs, that's kind of a critical thing. But if I talk about that theme, tenant management, people will go, okay, what do I need to do in the back end of my Microsoft to make this thing work? Talk to us about the experience that we've built from that, and I guess the quick wins using PowerShell scripting. What have you done a lot of work with our team, your team, to make that smooth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, there's that unknown, what do we do? How do I configure this thing? And, it's really easy to go out and buy, calling in Microsoft Teams, whether it's calling plans or you go through a direct routing provider. Ultimately, you still need to configure it. And, whose responsibility is that? And you pointed out that not all IT MSPs are voice specialists. So, as part of the service, we include that tenant setup. So we're making sure that we are capturing the information about how you want it configure, actually going into the tenant and configuring those things up for you. You've talked about PowerShell, you talked about scripting. Yes, we employ all of that just because that's the most efficient way of doing it, but it's all based around the customer's requirements and how they want it set up. Those IVRs, those call queues, etc., those ring groups. We're working collaboratively to make sure that you're getting the experience that you expect from the voice platform. It's not like, here are your trunks, off you go, configure it how you want. That's not what we're really about. There are companies, businesses, etc., that have used to traditionally someone looking after their phone system. So if they've got new users, if they've got people leaving, if they've got new requirements, they just ring them up and it's done. And really that's what we're trying to replicate, is that we are there, we're your trusted partner to just achieve that in a quick, easy manner, so you don't have to worry about it. It's really about taking the pain and the worry about that sort of platform management. We'll own that whole thing for you.
Sure, letting you get on with your day job essentially, and know
Exactly.
that you've got a good safe pair of hands. So yeah, I think that's important. Mike, another one that we pay big attention to, and this is really, really relevant for what we're seeing of obviously this mass migration back to the office. People are getting, kind of fed up of working at home. We're seeing this hybrid working. The network that a lot of companies left behind 18 months ago, and the demands on it from a pre-video world to now, majority Teams Zoom world. Talk to us about the network readiness. I know we've talked about it in some previous webinars, but just recap on why it's important, what we're looking for, and how it will ultimately help when people are back in the office, when we're thinking about the actual physical demands on the network.
Absolutely. Yeah, cast your minds back, January, February 2020. Everyone's working in the office. Everyone's making phone and conference calls. They've gone into lockdown for 18 months. We've all adopted video and collaboration platforms. We're starting to come back into the office. In fact, all three of us are sat in the same office today, which is very weird. Since we're running these webinars, we've all been doing it at home, but no, all of us are in the office. Socially distanced, of course. And we're running video, so you're running video, Misha's running video, I'm running video. There's probably a handful of other people running video calls right now. Now think about that at a scale. You've suddenly gone from a situation where you've built your network, your WAN infrastructure, your bandwidth requirements, your VLANs around voice. It's been nicely segregated. Everyone's come back from lockdown. They're still using the same, whether it be Zoom, whether it be Teams, whether it be WebEx. The video is a thing now, and everyone wants to do it. Okay, your bandwidth has now suddenly gone through the roof. You're not suddenly running a nice voice VLAN to keep all the traffic nice and segregated, because it's all on your data VLAN. So you've really got to think about, okay, the landscape has changed. People are coming back in. The requirements have changed. Now is a good time to really start assessing what your setup is. Can you cope with the increased demand on your office network? So as a technical team, as part of the projects, we offer a standard a sort of network readiness and optimization test that we can go into your network and actually run some simulations on there and actually tell you if you've got problems. We also deliver a document, which is it's not we call it the Bible, but it's not as thick as a Bible, thankfully. It's only about 12 pages long. But essentially what we've done is we've really highlighted, if you want to use, and it's specifically centered around Microsoft Teams, it's really highlighting all of the network infrastructure things that you need to be aware of, that you need to have implemented within your office infrastructure to make sure that when people come back, things work, things are prioritized, video works, screen sharing works, all of that just works seamlessly, because Teams has been optimized for people. It's actually going to work better from a home scenario than it is in an office scenario. It's actually been designed to be accessible from anywhere. So when you just throw a load of people back into an office which hasn't been designed to handle all this voice and video, you've got to start asking some questions about whether it's going to support that.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be daunting as such. It's about looking at the quick wins, making some amendments. You talked about VLAN changes and running over the data network. We've done this for a couple of customers, and we found out there was just a dodgy access point, I think, in one of the areas buildings, right, Mike? And it just meant that we could quite quickly pinpoint some on the surface remedial, fixes to make the experience better. So again, from our experience, if your network's right, your voice and video is going to be good on top. So because we understand both of those layers, we're able to help customers that are looking at this just make sure you've got the network underpinned and ready to give your users the best experience. That's not just for voice, that's just generally coming back into the office. Leased lines is a great one at the moment as well. We're seeing lots of customers that haven't been there for 18 months would have been paying for a certain bandwidth 18 months ago. That whole commodity area, you can get so much more bandwidth for less money. So if, again, on the call, have a look at your contract, come and talk to us, come talk to your providers. We can absolutely save some money and get you bigger bandwidth for less money. Or equally, you might be paying for massive bandwidth and you quite frankly don't need it if you've downscaled your office as well. So there's lots of quick wins right now that we can help sort of evaluate with you. Mike, the final piece, just from you before we wrap up with Misha was around what we're seeing a lot more now is the hardware decisions, and the biggest argument that we sort of we're seeing in the market, the Poly and the Jabbers and all of those will love to sell you everything, but headsets versus handsets, how has that changed massively within Teams, especially when people have been working at home, right?
I mean, through the projects that we've delivered Teams Voice to, the vast majority of them have ditched either 100% or up to about 80% of their physical handset estate. I think there is a feeling that unless you're fixed at a point that you need a device to actually pick up a handset, that people are already comfortable with the headset or speakerphone arrangement. There is obviously a different conversation to be had in sort of open plan offices. No one's going to want people to be on speakerphone while they're on calls. So investment is very much shifted from handset to headset. And getting the right.
Can I correct you on that? A good quality headset, Mike, is key here, right?
Very good. I was just coming on to that point, Mike. Thank you for prompting me. But yeah, because you'll probably notice all three of us are wearing wireless headsets. Gives us the freedom to move. We're not tethered to our laptop. But also they all three of these headsets support noise cancelling, and it's not just noise cancelling for drowning out the background noise, but it's noise cancelling in the sense that the person we're talking to is hopefully not hearing all the office noise as well. So it's really important that you think about these things. Do you work in noisy environments, etc.? The cost of a handset is roughly equivalent to the cost of a very good wireless noise cancelling headset. So it's really a shift of that investment. You're not buying the handset anymore, but you're buying a headset. But on the other hand, you don't have a handset on the desk, which means you don't need an Ethernet port on a switch to support that. Maybe have a look at your LAN infrastructure. Are you suddenly massively oversubscribed on ports to actually your requirement?
Again, people are used to this now. We've all been working from home for so long. We've been using headsets. The thought of having a handset now would just feel really alien. So I think actually moving to headsets is just a natural progression.
And it removes that barrier of sort of going to the finance director and saying, hey, we need 30, 40K for new hardware. Completely remove that now in the world of Teams, that you just don't need it. Unless there's a real good use case, maybe you need some spider phones in your conference room. Maybe you want to get some video kit. That's relevant, but just because people used to use handsets before they went away, we've all been working generally at home without them. But yeah, headsets key. Try and avoid people coming in with like Apple AirPods and things like that. They're great when you're on your own, but as soon as you're in a noisy office, they literally pick up everything. So it's just that user experience. Really think about that if you're thinking about Teams back in the office. So look, thank you very much for bearing with us. Misha, we talked about it at the beginning, and I think this is the final piece of the pie. So, customers gone out, they've done all of the planning, they've got Teams on board, you're handing over a project. Talk to us about the transition from projects to support and why that is so key to ultimately making the project a success.
Sure. Yeah, we've actually had a few customers we've spoken to sort of pre-signature who've been really concerned about that because they've had experiences in the past where they've done a project and as soon as it's done, they've just kind of been dropped and have felt quite lost and not sort of known where to go for any support. And equally, the support team that they've then spoken to hasn't had any of their background information, any context of the project that they've just completed. So we have something called early life support, which happens after the cutover to Teams. So we'll do an introduction with our service desk, be it with the project contact, or if you have your own service desk that's going to be working with ours, and we'll do a session dedicated to that again, so we understand sort of who does what, and where possible try to work within your existing process and system. Again, it's not always possible to integrate systems per se, but we need to understand the way that you guys run your service desk so we can help to feed into that. So for sort of usually between 5 to 10 working days, you'll enter into an early life support phase, which means you'd still log any sort of snags that come out off the back of the project, any changes that you realize. You might have designed something and then actually when it's actually in and working, you think, doesn't quite work for us, we want to tweak it. They'll be raised as a standard ticket, so you guys are going to get used to that process, but they'll automatically be routed back to the project team. So those people will be on that, the people you've known over the last weeks or months, depending on how long the process takes, will be that familiar contact. And again, those initial snags will be dealt with by that team, and then there'll be a migration over to BAU support. But again, full introductions and a handover internally between the project team and the service desk to say, this is the way these guys work, this is what they've got, this is why, this is who this person is, and so on, just so there's an understanding of the context. It's not just about the product, it's about the story behind it.
Yeah, sure. And I think in terms of the actual, Mike, you're back, in terms of the ongoing support, monthly, quarterly reviews, the actual ticketing process that we go through, we hold ourselves accountable. Talk to us briefly, Mike, at the end of the call here, just around the way that we manage our customers and literally say, this is our SLA and this is how we performed against it.
Absolutely. So, we will measure that performance on those tickets, and we will present that to you in a report that's web-based. You can drill through, you can have a look at the tickets, you can look at ticket types, what's been causing you the most problems. Obviously, we will be using that information internally because data is literally power. So we will keep all that information. We'll hold ourselves to account. If we're not hitting our SLAs, we'll present that. We'll work on ways to do that. Thankfully, that hasn't happened. It's a very difficult meeting to be in, Mike. I don't think you've had any that's quite like that. But yeah, generally speaking, we're aiming for 100% to meet all of our SLAs in terms of resolutions to any problems that you may or may not have.
So whilst we're not a BT, we're still personal. We've got good people around us to actually get this stuff from front end, pre-sales, all the way through to support. Everyone is involved and entrenched within Teams, specifically on the voice side. So rest assured, end to end, we'll look after you. So with that, guys, we've reached the end of the session. I'd like to say thank you to Mike and Misha as always. As I said, for anyone on the call, please do use the chat function. We'll keep the bridge open for the next sort of 5-10 minutes. If there's any questions on that you'd like to ask publicly, or equally you can join us offline for any more sessions. But thank you very much for your time. We run these monthly. Always welcome to feedback. If there's anything you want to hear about Microsoft Teams, please drop us a note. But with that, thank you very much for joining on this Thursday afternoon, and we'll look to speak to you soon. Thank you very much. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
There you go. Everyone gone.
I think we're clear. Yeah. Just going to stop the recording.
Yeah. Well done.